Hello everybody, welcome back. On today's Digital Detox Day video, I am talking all things anxiety, and I was really excited to do this video because I thought there is no one I would rather do this video with than my therapist, someone I've spoken to for how many years now? 4.5, 5?
5? It must be 5. It might even be 6. I don't really know.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It's been a long time. So this is Alexis, and she has been a therapist for many, many years, and she speaks to a range of different people with different, how would you best describe?
Different
mental health
issues and problems.
Yeah.
And yes, their lives aren't working in the way they'd like them to.
Yes. And actually, one of the things that was so clear when we were looking into how social media makes people feel was how anxious people feel in general, but also when it comes to social media and comparing yourself, and also the effects of a lot of the other videos that we've already filmed. So you've got things like cyberbullying, you've got things like body dysmorphia and body confidence, and there's so many different elements and areas within social media that can impact somebody's mental health. But I think one overarching feeling that a lot of people had was this kind of anxious, like very unsettled feeling. And so I thought it would be great to be able to sit down with Alexis and talk a little bit more about that. Hopefully some of you will resonate with this, or it will help you in some way, or at least help you to know that you are not alone in feeling like that, and that there are some things that might be able to help you. So the first question then, can you tell us a little bit more about what anxiety is?
Yes, anxiety is a very broad field. So anxiety is a very broad field. We all feel anxious. People will often say to me, I want to get rid of my anxiety. Yet anxiety is an important human mind process. We have to be able to feel anxious because our anxiety is there to help us keep safe, which is what we want. The problems arise when anxiety gets out of hand, and our imagination, which we're fortunate to have, but our imagination constructs thoughts that actually unsettle us. So we can be anxious about all sorts of things in all sorts of ways. But with social media in particular, we become anxious because of things that we are watching or listening to. And that's a very sort of specific area of anxiety.
So I guess this kicks on from that, but why does social media often make people feel worse, especially for somebody who might already have a very vivid imagination? Like, we know my imagination is...
Oh, yes.
is quite colourful.
Yes.
So somebody whose mind is more susceptible to those things, why would something like social media make that worse for that person?
Because they tune into it, literally. So they're tuning into it. So if you think of anxiety, it's the imagination creating thoughts, and always anxiety is projected into a future. So we worry, even if it's something that we think we might have said or we might have upset somebody. But even if we're looking into the past about something we're worried about, we're still projecting it into what will that mean for me in my future. Mm-hmm. And it's the imagination of not knowing what comes next. So we want to keep safe. And one of the things that makes us feel safe is if we feel in control. And one of the things that makes us feel in control is knowing what's going to be happening, or knowing what's going on around us. Now with social media, because it's so vast and you can tap into so many different areas of what's going on around us or what's going to happen next, rather than helping and soothing our anxiety, which basically is worry, it fuels it. Because we tend to go looking, as the mind does, it always goes looking for the things it doesn't want to be really looking at. So, and the one that I've always used with you, and it's a very common one, is, if you don't try not to think of the colour blue, And then because we have to think of blue to be able to negate that colour, we actually go looking for all the things that are fueling our anxieties in trying to soothe them. But of course, all we're doing is just inflaming it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is that we tend to go looking for, we narrow our perception with social media. So we go looking for the ideas and the beliefs and the values and the concerns that feed into what we are anxious about, rather than seeing the bigger, broader picture, which is definitely there on social media, but we're not following those people, we're not reading those news, we're not listening to that podcast, we're actually just homing in on all the stuff that's going to make us feel worse.
So interesting. And actually, a fun fact with the colour blue, I've been now doing this with Alexis for 5 years, and whenever she says that, I think of green.
Yeah,
I've reprogrammed my mind.
Yes. And that is basically how it sounds so simple, yet it isn't easy. But working with anxiety, that's actually how we have to train the mind. We have to train the mind to go where we want it to go, rather than trying to keep it away from all the stuff that we don't like.
Yeah, because ultimately keeping it away from only exasperates how you feel about certain things.
Yes, because we're all the time we're thinking about what we don't want rather than thinking about what we do want.
And I can imagine for a lot of people, especially during lockdown, where social media was being used a lot more and the news was much more intense, and it was everywhere you were looking. You know, I would open my phone and I had hundreds of news articles, and then I would go on Instagram, which usually would be sort of my escape, like somewhere I can follow the people that I like watching, and everyone was talking about it. And you know, we're on our phones more and we're FaceTiming our friends and our families, and that interaction we're having with our devices and with social media kind of got doubled in those months.
Or tripled or quadrupled. I mean, it was huge. And people were tuning into the 5 o'clock bulletin, they're listening to the news, everybody's watching the figures go up. And all that's doing is creating this sense of, I'm not in control, I'm not safe, I don't know what's going to happen next. And it brought into sharp focus what anxiety actually is, which is this aspect of, I want to know what's happening, I want to feel I'm in control. And of course, within our society, in particular, because we're very fortunate because of where we live in the world, we don't really have that unsettled mass anxiety happen very often. You know, we tend to live in quite a secure environment. We have good health care. We do tend to have a lot of control over our day-to-day lives without even being consciously aware of it. So when something like this happens, like COVID, it really escalates that feeling of, well, I'm not safe.
Yeah, it's so true.
It's so easy then to go down what I call rabbit holes of the mind, but they're things where we can get knocked more off balance by reading about conspiracy theories or area that we live in, the statistics in our particular area. And that just, as you can imagine, and it is imagination, fuels it all the more.
Can social media ever be good for people with anxiety?
Oh, yes. We go back to this thing where I said at the beginning, you know, people will often say to me about getting rid of anxiety, and no, don't ever get rid of anxiety, because if you think of somebody who doesn't live with anxiety, they're not safe because they don't know when they need to be concerned about something. So the difference is between worry, which is just endless round and round, and I know we've talked about this before, and worry where you can actually do something about it, because if you do something about what you're worried about, you can take action on it, and then the worry isn't there anymore. So it's about if you can't actually take action on a worry, then you need to drop it. So where social media can be very helpful with that, because often people will say to me, how can I drop a worry? I'm worried. How can I drop it? And I say, well, can you take action on it? No. And I don't mean action on it by Googling anything either. That's not taking action. That's just feeling the worry.
Worrying that you didn't lock the door, and being able, if you were 2 minutes down the road, can you go back and check? Yes. You can. Okay,
that's
then
action.
Yeah.
But don't lie there worrying, or go off on your wherever you're going, your journey, or whatever you're doing by worrying about it. But what you can do is distract yourself. Distracting ourselves is a very good way of dropping worries. So if you can't take action on a worry and you're finding it difficult to drop it, that's where tuning into something on social media can be so helpful, because before you know it, you're thinking about, find something lighthearted. I think Joe Wicks, I don't really know much about Joe Wicks, but I do know he was very, very popular during lockdown. And I think he was great for being able to take people's worries and anxieties and channel them somewhere where they were so distracted and physically active, which always helps, physical activity, being out in nature, and really made a difference for people. Because they realised that their worries were just worries. And actually, when they did some physical exercise and they were whatever they were doing with Joe Wicks, it worked for them.
Exactly.
So that's where social media comes into its own. What you do on social media, you encourage people. I know the book club and things like that. You're taking people in this other direction. You're taking them, not trying to get away from and worried about, but I could focus on this instead. So I think that's where social media has a real strength, and it does connect people.
Yes.
And being connected with people is so important for us as human beings.
Definitely. I suppose, like most things, at a good level, when it works at a good level, it's good. And it's only if you consume too much that it can become an issue.
Yes, I meant to say that when we were talking about anxiety. This thing about anxiety is necessary. So I always mark things on scales of 0 to 10. Again, you're very familiar with this. We've been doing this for a long while. So, how are you feeling 0 to 10? How do you feel on a scale of 0 to 10 about being anxious? It's when people are, I'm up at an 8, I'm up at a 9, I'm up at a 10. That's when anxiety is a real issue. That's when it's a real problem. That's when it needs to be lowered. But when anxiety is nicely in the background at a 1, 2, that's fine. That's where it's meant to be. It's meant to just be there in the background. So if I need to be a little bit aware of something, crossing the road, or, my laptop just cutting out, or that wouldn't make me anxious, but it's that sort of thing. But it just needs to be ticking away in the background very softly, so it's when it's needed it steps forward. But for people who are really anxious and who are fueling their anxiety, they're keeping themselves up at that 8, 9, 10, and that's when it's not good for you, as you know.
As I know. It's taken me a good few years, but I'd say I'm definitely on the lower scale now.
You are now, yes.
You always used a really good metaphor, is it, for those levels of anxiety. And it was something about a lion in a bush, and I can't remember what it was. It was...
Yes, there's two. There's one that, it's like if you think of early man and think about how the mind and brain developed, if we're trotting across the savannah and we see a rustle, the bush is rustling, we need to be aware that could be a lion in there. Mm-hmm. And that's where anxiety at 1, 2 works. When we're trotting across the open plains and we're constantly looking, or we won't even step out onto those open plains
in case there's a lion.
Scared. Now that's where anxiety is an 8, 9, 10, and now it's really counterproductive. And of course, the other one that I use with people is if I'm sitting in my office and we're chatting away, if there's suddenly a loud roar outside or a loud bang, it's quite normal and perfectly okay from an anxiety point of view to step up and look out the window and see what's going on, because we do need to know. Yeah. And then once we've discounted that fear, we're okay.
Mm-hmm. What are the best personal coping strategies for people experiencing anxiety?
That's really interesting.
And I suppose it's hard because, as I know, everybody's anxieties are so different. Not one person will have the exact feelings that another person will have, and they will all stem from such different things and issues and different parts of people's lives. Some might be very deep rooted, some might be quite surface level. So I understand that's quite a hard question to answer.
It's a very broad question.
Yeah.
But I forgot what the question was now. So
any personal coping strategies. So I suppose any tips you've ever given me, I can think of a really good one.
I think this is with regard to social media and people coming in the room. Is
that one?
No? Yeah.
So I have two that I always sort of carry in my back pocket.
All right.
And the first one is the distraction, which you touched on already, and that giving yourself those 10-minute chunks.
Yes.
Specifically if you feel a panic attack coming, or you can feel your anxiety really like spiraling a bit, to be able to split your time up in order to distract yourself and allow your mind to remember that time is moving forward, because I think for a lot of people, when they're feeling very anxious, they feel a bit stuck in time.
Yes.
And that's always helped me, is those like, do 10 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of watching a bit of Gavin and Stacey, 10 minutes of playing a game on an app, 10 minutes of flicking through Instagram. But as long as you're changing that up, if you're feeling those intense feelings, it really, really helps me.
Yes, because so we'll do a broad one for general anxiety. Well, it's not general anxiety, but how anxiety is, and then we can move it into more specific for social media, if that's what you would like.
Yeah.
So for anxiety as a process, what happens with the mind is it freezes itself in that anxiety. We all know about the fight or flight. I'm going to fight, I'm going to run. But actually, people don't talk about it, but there are two more. There's faint and there's freeze. Now, we'll leave faint because that's quite a specific area. But freezing is what we generally do. We freeze ourselves in that anxiety. We can't move. We can't move our minds. Our mind's frozen in it. So there are methods that can be used, which over the years I've developed, because, as you say, each client, each person has their own specific way of experiencing anxiety. The process is the same, so you get the same anxiety feelings of getting warm and fast heart and breathing.
This.
Oh, yeah.
That was mine.
Breathing. Oh, yes. And how people experience it is very specific to that. So the process is the same for everyone. How anxiety works in the mind, it builds, it freezes. But then so that's the process. But then everybody is an individual. So it's actually finding out what their individual ways of doing anxiety is. But on a broader scale, even with the process itself, there's a lot of things that can be done to help, a lot of things, and one of those is, I call them the tools, and like I say, they're things I've just sort of worked on over the years, but there's time delay, which is I'm going to give myself 10 minutes. I'm not ignoring the fact that I feel uneasy and unsettled, but I'm going to wait 10 minutes and then see how I feel then. And very often the mind is like a butterfly. It moves on really quickly. And by the time you come back after 10 minutes, the mind's already moved on. It's not thinking about it anymore.
Very fickle.
Very fickle. The mind is very fickle. It's abstract, you see. That's why social media feeds into the mind so easily. It's so easy to sit down and click on a link and click on another link and click on another link, because that's what the mind does all the time anyway, day-to-day life. It just is constantly moving on to the next thing. Chunking time down is a really effective one for a process of moving through something. So I think with you, we talked about when you were flying, when you were going on a flight, and it's like, right, well, the flight is going to be 4 hours, so I'm chunking it down into hour bites. And in that first hour, I'll read my book. Oh, I've done that now. Second hour, oh, I'll do this. And the mind's very good at thinking, oh, I'm halfway there now. This is nearly done. And because it's subconscious, it can do that. Another thing that's really, really helpful, and each of these methods, they usually find one or two of them that work best for them. Another one that's really good is getting movement beyond. So it's so again, if we use the flight as an example, it's what will the hotel be like when I get there? What will I be eating this evening? And we move the mind out of that frozen mode into something in the future. Sometimes people are scared about going to the dentist, and I always say, look, excuse me, before you go to the dentist, get your home set up so when you come back, you've got, a nice afternoon planned, you've got a book to read, whatever it is you like to do, but plan something. Plan to go out this evening, plan to have a friend round this evening. So actually, that there is something beyond this thing that you're going to be doing. Yes. So that's sort of on a general day-to-day basis. But specifically with social media, I think probably it's this thing of closing down the avenues that are fueling it and finding other avenues that are taking you in different ways. So talking about COVID again, I was sort of inundated with people being in touch, finding it very difficult day to day. And if you need to know something, you will know it. It's okay to stop watching the news quite so much.
Yeah.
You will find out things. It's really important to try to make sure that you don't engage in too much conversation about it. So, if somebody starts a thread, don't engage with it. Engagement always opens something up and fuels it. So even if you're taking an opposing view, you've still absorbed yourself into it. There's been a lot of talk about nature, and it is very good. Physical activity in nature is very good. That again is movement. If we go back to that thing of always keep the mind moving into a different direction, going outside, it helps. We're moving, we're seeing things, we're hearing different things, and connecting with others, but not necessarily in that, oh, isn't it dreadful? Have you read the news? Have you heard the figures? New Zealand's doing much better than we are. Well, it's a much smaller country. It's about keeping things in perspective, and we are very, very quick to judge, which is another thing with social media, which I'm sure we'll move into, about judging and comparing. We're very, very quick to judge, and we usually judge negatively. So it's very important to stop that process of finding fault. They should have done more, they haven't done this. I mean, it doesn't mean we become complacent, but we take action from a point of factual information, not from paranoia and anxiety.
And I think specifically online, those things can spiral and mould into something so much bigger, or something that it didn't even start off as.
Yes.
And it's so easy with social media to get involved in those conversations, or to say something that you wouldn't necessarily say to somebody if you were sat opposite them at your kitchen table.
Oh, so true. And it becomes almost, it's a crowd, and it can become a mob. Yeah. And you have been on the receiving end of some of this that can go on social media, where people become inflamed and make comments and have an opinion, and they're uninformed. They don't know the situation. And it's everybody climbing on a bandwagon, or everybody, you think, having their opinion, their point of view, which doesn't really always relate to the subject that is being discussed.
I think one other thing that I always find very helpful, and that I know others do too, is to remember that you only see a very tiny fraction of how somebody really is, the friendships, the bonds they have with people. A lot of what people share on social media is not the full picture. It would be very hard to give the full picture of someone's entire life online, and it will always be a best bits reel.
Oh yes, because people don't want the stuff. They wouldn't. Nobody wants to know.
Yeah, it would be TMI if everybody shared every aspect of their life.
Yes.
And I think sometimes being able to bring that back into perspective, if somebody was finding it particularly hard with friends in school. I know so many young teens and people in their kind of middle teens that have grown up with the internet, whereas I had a very different experience of the internet when I was a teenager. we had it, but we didn't use it like that. There was no social media. If I had fallouts with my friends, it was in the classroom, and we would send each other notes or meet up at break time and talk about it. And I think for a lot of young people who are growing up with the access to be able to say whatever they want to somebody else in their classroom via social media, it must be so it must feel like such a personal, awful experience to have to go through that.
What's going on there, and this is where social media has divided things so much, is that if you talk about passing a note in class, it's anonymous and you're aware of a whole classroom. But what happens with social media, sorry, it's not anonymous and it's a whole classroom. So within a situation where a note is passed in class, it's you kind of know who it's coming from and you are in a group. So you're with your peer group. What happens on social media though is when somebody metaphorically passes that note, they're completely anonymous. You don't know where that's coming from. And you're not in a peer group. There's only you and your screen. So the two things there are complete. Yes. So your home is invaded. So your personal space is invaded. There's nowhere you can go to be safe. Ironically, a lot of people feel safe in their bedroom, but that's also the place where they will most view their social media. The comments that are being made seem so personal, rather than realising that person is just like that to everybody. In a classroom, that person's like that. Yeah, they're really mean to everyone. But when it's on screen, it's so personal because it's like that person's only being mean to me. And of course, when you're in an environment where you know who it is who's projecting that towards you, you have some protection. But when it's so anonymous, you don't really know who that person is. You don't know how old they are. You don't know what they look like. You don't know what their background is. You don't know what their belief and values are. It's really demoralising.
It is. And I think a lot of people struggle with that side of the internet. Whether you've got a following or you don't, and you just have, your school friends and, your peers and family that follow you. I think that level of anonymity that comes with social media is often, it's like a wall has come down and you don't really know where to go to feel safe, I suppose, especially if you're reading this in your home, when you're at home with your family, the people who do know you and do love you. It can be very confusing and you can feel a bit like backed into a corner, I suppose.
So what can be done about that? Now, ways that can be helpful are taking back our own personal power. We are in charge of ourselves. So very often people, and this is anxiety, very often people will say, that hurt me, that upset me, that made me feel. But actually, because anxiety always feels like it's coming from outside us, it's really important to say, I didn't like that, but I can choose how I react about it. That's so important, because you don't have to always like what's happened, but you do have control about how we feel. And because anxiety is all about feeling out of control, being able to realise that and make connections with that is so important. And I think we've used a lot in the past, we've used that thing of don't invite people into your home. So
I do this a lot.
So when we are, reading all these comments, or when we feel so isolated and whatever it is that we're feeling, it's really important to realise that we don't know who these people are, and what we're doing is we're actually letting them come into our private space. It's like we've just invited all these people that we don't know to come through the front door and make popcorn and watch our TV show with us, and they're not even nice to us. So why would we do that? And it's about closing that down And it's about being very, again, centered within ourselves and taking our own personal power to ourselves. And realizing, as you just so rightly said a few moments ago, we know the people who care about us, we know the people who love us, they really know us. They're the ones who are important.
Definitely. So for anybody who, and this is just in general now, not necessarily just in terms of social media, if somebody is watching this now and they're really struggling with their anxiety, what advice would you give them in terms of seeking a therapist, or, you know, trying to kind of deal with their feelings a little more? Yes,
I think there's a few things there. One of them is to realise that you're not alone. You're definitely not alone. And everybody, even all these people, and that's social media with the comparing and judging, but everybody feels a level of anxiety. It's quite normal. And you're doing anxiety. Remember, that was one we always used as well. It's happening to you, you're doing it. So you can take control of this, and you can learn and train your mind how to do it differently. So that's the first step. If you are able to realize that and do some work on yourself with some of these things we've talked about, then that's very good. And for some people that will really work, taking charge of it themselves. If there's a problem, though, that's happened perhaps in the past, or it's gotten a bit out of control, how you're feeling day to day, then it is really good then to seek professional help. Now, those steps of seeking professional help can seem quite daunting. Where do I go? Who do I speak to? How am I going to speak to someone? Sometimes doctors are very good. You can approach a doctor and they will refer you on. You can sometimes, it's really good if you speak to someone who has already spoken to somebody and found they've got good results from the therapist they've worked with. So a personal recommendation to someone is very good. However, the social media is brilliant because there's so much information on there. So you researching online and finding a therapist is, for most people, the way to do it. And it's really good to read about that person and read about it's not so testimonials and qualifications, all that help, but it's important to feel that you feel a rapport with that person and that you feel that person will understand you. And sometimes people will, and it's good to narrow it down to 3 and then perhaps have a phone conversation, or if you don't like talking on the phone, send them an email. You know, a good therapist will be perfectly happy to answer your concerns in an email if you find it difficult to talk on the phone. And then make a selection from there. When you go for a first session, keep it open-ended. And what I mean by that is, don't say, I'm definitely going to be working with this person. Go along and listen and hear what they have to say. Again, this is about you personally taking back control. If you feel you don't get on with that person, that's fine. Find someone else. Sometimes people work with a therapist and they will persevere with the therapist who isn't actually helping them very much. It's quite okay to say this isn't working for me and go and find somebody else. Never give up. There is help out there. Go and find somebody who you can work with and who you do have a rapport with, who will really be able to understand you and help you.
Yeah, and I think that don't give up is so important because
yes.
I know, and I've had many messages from people over the years who have said, I plucked up so much courage to go and speak to this therapist, and it was awful, and I hated talking about the things they were asking me about, and now I'm too scared to find somebody else, or I don't want to. Therapy's not for me. They had one session and they said, no, it didn't work. And I think it's so important, as Alexis said, to never give up and continue to find that person that works for you as much as you are working with them, they are working with you, and it has to work both ways. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best results you can get. And there are so many therapists out there that there will be somebody that will work with you, and it's worth it. And I think it's also worth pointing out that sometimes you might only need a few sessions, but a lot of the time it's going to take a lot more work than maybe some people originally think. Like, I've been speaking to you for 4.5, 5 years. And I think, obviously, I've come such a long way from first speaking to you. But had I have known in 2014 that my life would be so different now as a 30-year-old than it was as a 24-year-old. Oh, wow, 6 years then.
I think so. I thought 6, yeah. I did think 6 at the beginning.
I probably would never have guessed it would take that long, but I also don't think I would have anticipated such a difference. And I think it's knowing that, like, you put in that work and you really dedicate the time, you will see the results, and it's life-changing.
It is life-changing, and particularly if you are young, and you do something about it, you train your mind from a young age, and that just keeps going in that new direction. And yes, we have worked for a lot of years together, yet for you, yours had become very compounded. For a lot of people, it wouldn't necessarily be so intense and so difficult. However, it's very true what you said there about having to work hard at it. You must take on board what the therapist won't do it for you. The therapist is there to guide you and help you and share their skill and knowledge. But the person who wants to do something about their anxiety, again, I go back to this personal power, they have to take on board responsibility for themselves, and they have to practice all the time. Because everybody has to learn how to manage their anxieties. It's all about management. And you manage
I like how you always call it mind management.
It is. It's managing your mind. It's training your mind and managing your mind.
Sometimes I explain it to people, therapy, that there are probably a lot of very quick or much kind of more simple ways of very quickly dispersing anxiety or those anxious feelings, like ripping the top of a weed off.
Yes.
You're just ripping it at ground level, but the roots are still there and it will regrow. And whenever I've explained it like that to somebody, they found that really useful, because I also encounter a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, sometimes my anxiety is quite bad, but at the moment it's fine. At the moment I don't have an issue. And I'm like, it's still in there though, probably. It's still like the roots are still there.
Oh, you are so, yes, that's so true. And this is why when we talk about the virus and COVID, actually that's not in itself what's causing anxiety. I always say that's the vehicle it rode in on. Because if you have an underlying anxiety, you will attach to whatever is happening. So people who say, oh, I'm okay at the moment, it's because, yes, nothing's challenging you at the moment. Nothing is, the seas are calm, there's no storm, there's nothing. And the way that people have reacted to the virus has highlighted for them areas that they haven't resolved, the roots of something. And there are a lot of quick fix remedies out there, and 2 or 3 sessions and you'll be fine. It's not that. It's a deeper thing than that. You need to make sure that it is properly gone into and solved at that root base. Yeah,
definitely. So we've sort of covered anxiety in terms of cyberbullying, anonymity, but what about people who struggle with social media in a sense of comparison and, when you're scrolling through your Instagram and you're like, that person's in the Maldives and I'm at home and it's raining and that's making me feel not good about myself or my life, or catastrophizing, as we know, is what I like to do.
yes.
Where one thing feels really bad and then it's just like my whole life is really bad.
Yes.
What would you say about that in terms of social media and comparison?
A couple of things there. One, stacking, which I'll come back to in a second, and comparing and judging. What we do as human beings is we compare and judge. It's part of one of the mind's functions. We have to be able to compare and judge to know what's going on in the world around us. So we compare ourselves, and that's how we learn, is we see somebody doing something, we think, I could do that. And we judge because we need to know. It's like 2 dogs meeting up. It's like when Nala meets another dog. She's judging them, is this going to be an okay dog or is this not going to be an okay dog?
At least we don't sniff each other's bottoms.
We don't do that. That's very true. That would be a bit weird. So we compare and judge. Where we go off track, though, and this again is where social media feeds into this, is that sometimes we compare and judge and we make ourselves less than. We don't feel our own life is okay. And then we start looking at other people's lives and we feel they have a much better life than us. We feel we're wrong. This often happens with people, if your self-esteem is low, again, this sense of myself isn't enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. And we forget that if we suddenly transposed ourselves into that person's life, we would find out all sorts of things about that person's life that we don't like. So people will sometimes say, I'd like to have a lot of money. Okay, fine. Yet if you have a lot of money, that in itself will create problems. Everything comes with an anxiety-inducing possibility. There is nothing that is anxiety-free. And if you are an anxious person, you will be anxious living in a big mansion and worrying about security, as you would be about somebody breaking into your home and stealing your laptop if you just, live in a regular home. If you have a helicopter and a fleet of cars, you'll be worried about them all being fueled and serviced and everything, just as you would about your own car needing an MOT. It's all comparative to what our individual circumstances are. And the thing with social media is too often we keep transposing ourselves into other people's lives and imagining that somehow they have no worries, no concerns, no problems. Well, of course they do. Of course they do. Everybody does. And we lose sight of that sometimes with social media. And then the other thing there that you said so correctly is this thing about you start to think that person looks much nicer than I do. There's this thing of where we pile one thing on top of another. So I don't look very good, I don't have friends, I don't have a very nice job, I'm not happy in my work. And suddenly you've looked at this one person in a picture and you've made it all about your life and how everything is wrong with your life. And now you're sitting there with this whole lap full of problems and issues and worries. And that feels so heavy and it's so unnecessary. Because we've decided that that's the way our life is, which it isn't at all.
So thank you so much, Alexis. It's been amazing to be able to chat to you, and I know it will help so many people. It's been a dream video to make. Obviously, I know you very well, but this isn't usually your natural habitat. So we've made it work even during COVID. So thank you so much. And leave your comments below, guys. Let me know if this has helped you or if you feel a sense of reassurance. And make sure to follow I Am Whole for all other digital detox activity, and join in with us on the 5th of September to have a completely social media free day. See you soon.
Join us on the 5th of September and post a picture letting everyone know you're off.